Apps have just launched inside ChatGPT, and I think it's the biggest opportunity that we're seeing in AI right now. And these kind of distribution opportunities are incredibly rare. In the era of the internet, we had opportunities such as Facebook open with their marketplace and then a huge ad platform. We had Google that opened up with a search engine and then an ad platform. And then we had iPhones that came out and had the App Store, and we are seeing the same thing now. This is the first time we're seeing it in AI, and it's very clear what OpenAI are doing. They are trying to be the frontier of the internet. You query everything within ChatGPT, and soon you will be able to have your apps be there as well. But at some point, never need to leave it. And what that means is that if you want to be relevant, you have to have a place there. And what typically happens is that when customers expect this experience, it's going to be they never leave and they use the applications that exist there. There will still be some use cases for the browser, absolutely, but we are seeing it become applications existing in LLMs, and that will be a more dominant world. So what's going to happen in the future is if someone wants to access a particular platform or experience, they can simply just tag that application and access it directly within ChatGPT. But what you also find is they are able to just prompt, get an answer, and then as they do, apps will be called to then enable that experience. So without even leaving ChatGPT, someone has just created a whole Spotify playlist. And I think what's really interesting is actually the opportunity that happens not just when they know to call an app, right? The thing that's interesting is when apps get called and you weren't even aware of the app in the first place. This means that, let's say they're doing a prompt and they're saying something like, create me a presentation. They might know Canva, but maybe your app is more bespoke for the presentation, so they call yours. And why that's amazing is it is huge from a distribution opportunity. And that is what we want to talk about today. We want to talk about how you can build apps in the App Store now. This App Store will be available soon, and you'll be able to publish your apps to OpenAI and get them accepted. But right now you can start developing and start to learn how to build these applications. And when you do that, you then will be first. And those were always the people that made the most and had the most advantage, were the people that were there right at the beginning. And you can already start to learn this stuff. And what you can do is also prime your app to be discoverable. And that's really important because it enables what I just mentioned, which is you can, just by someone prompting without them even knowing your app, get it called and get it used. So what we're going to be doing today is we are going to be showing you a demo of an app that we've built. We're going to talk to you about the whole experience and explain what was good, what was bad, and what you can learn so that you can build these applications yourself. We're also going to run through what we think are the best opportunities that there are to build applications in ChatGPT right now. We're also going to talk about how to get your app actually found, which is one of the most important things. If you can get your app found above everyone else, then you will get the distribution advantage. And then we're also going to talk about how to actually play the game. We're entering into a new era of a distribution channel, and you want to make sure that you get as much of the benefits, but also don't get trapped in an ecosystem. And we're going to cover all of that today. What are we building today?
Today we are playing around with the OpenAI Apps SDK, and we're going to build a number of use cases over the next weeks we find interesting. But one we wanted to start with is Fiverr native in OpenAI. This is a very intuitive use case if you think about it, because when we're talking to chat, we're really putting a lot of requirements for things we want to achieve, right? So vibe coding, design, legal. We're doing more and more work with the assistance of LLMs, but they hallucinate. They don't get you to the professional level that you need to. If you're going to sign a contract, you're not going to trust actually signing that without having a qualified real human professional look at that, and that's not going to change for some time. So there is a real need for professionals to still validate and get you to that level of actual usefulness. And why not just do it straight in ChatGPT? So that's what we built. So I think we can just jump right into the demo.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll share my screen.
And we're gonna talk about.
I'll talk about how we built it. It really isn't that hard, but let's first go into the experience. So let's say you are thinking about a new company, product, and you're going to have to do design work. You can't get around that. So I'm creating a new app for, I don't know, AI voice. I need a cool AI voice logo. Make a proposal, and you fire that off. That's something that all of us are probably doing. It looks like it's not even making a voice. So let me stop this. Use um, Sora or an image generator, please. Design a logo. So there we go. It's going to make a logo proposal. I don't know what's going to come out of it. Let's just have a look. What do we think of a voice app?
Yeah, I always find ChatGPT's is slower than Nano Banana. I find Nano Banana a lot faster with the image gen, but I don't think it's using Sora in here. Sora's separate at the moment. I don't know if it's using
Is
what
it,
it's
is
using.
it Midjourney that ChatGPT is using in
They've got
the Dolly? Oh,
no
it's Dolly.
Yeah, Dali. Meta's got the partnership with Midjourney, but I don't think it's going particularly well. They recently launched their like effectively Sora competitor, and it's significantly worse. It's basically just complete AI slop. Whereas the Sora 2 app's actually doing quite well at the moment, interestingly.
Right. So we are designing a logo for EchoMind. It even took the liberty of naming the product. So let's say I'm happy with it, but I want to get this logo different colors designed with a, let's say, more warm hue color palette. I need it then to be in an SVG, PNG, and all website metadata assets. So like let's also do like iOS, Android, etc. This is just design work, right? Like you need someone that knows how to do this and just gets it done, right? So I kind of give the requirement, the right direction. This is the form. I'm happy with it. Um, Now I'm gonna, like, traditionally you would go on Fiverr, right? Or some Upwork or something like that, and then just put a design brief. So you probably have like a budget. I have a budget of, like $500 for this. I need it done ASAP, but deadline is Friday. Let's create a gig for a freelancer. Pick this up. So this feels very intuitive to me, right? So I now know I have some work and I want to hand it off to a freelancer. So you can use the Apps SDK to kind of bring a Fiverr experience straight into chat. So here you can see that it's found the Ghost Team MCP. It's now going to create a gig card. It takes a few seconds, and that's because MCPs, they do a lot of logic in the background. It's not as fast as APIs, but it does do a good job at essentially creating a very clear job offering. So logo redesign with warm palette, that was my requirement. My success criteria needs to be delivered by Friday, warm palette integrated. And I created it in a way so that you can just edit this or maybe add something, like I also want a grayscale version. This can be edited, maybe I actually regret charging that much. I looked at my bank account, we're going to do $300. I can make this full screen, a little bit easier editing, right? Um, and then once I'm happy, I'll just do save gig straight in, almost like it's an app inside ChatGPT. And right now I ask for it to put in an email, and that's because there isn't really an authentication layer we can easily access. And I also ask it to put the ChatGPT chat share link. And I think this is really interesting because it gives a lot of context to a potential freelancer. So in this case, right, they'd be able to click on this link and see the actual logos that we've been working on. So they can also understand, okay, these are the inputs, the assets, or even the questions, and understand a little bit of my psychology to help deliver the gig. These share links take forever.
Hit on some of
Yeah,
them. I think like when they've got heavy loads, when they've got apps and stuff inside of them, then it takes a while.
yeah, but this is crazy. I'm just trying to share the chat.
I think while we're waiting for that, one other thing that I think is interesting, if you notice, we can go back to the prompt in a bit, but we've been playing with when does it choose to show the app? So there are two instances an app can be shown. You can say, let's say you're aware of, we called it ChatGig. Let's say you're aware of ChatGig. You can ask, create me a freelance gig for this using ChatGig. And then it's going to almost know to call in the MCP or the app, Whereas the other alternative is that, and I think a more exciting use case when you think about, we'll talk later about sort of the distribution angle that ChatGPT is offering. If people aren't aware of your app, but they do a task that is similar, like you'll notice in the prompt when we go back, it mentions create a gig. Now it's then therefore using almost SEO like terms, right? AEO to understand, oh, gig, that's in ChatGig's name. I will then use ChatGig to create that freelance gig. And what's cool is therefore it gives you discoverability. So that's something to think about because ChatGPT or OpenAI, they've already been giving guidance on metadata, how to be searchable, how to be found. And it's going to be a huge part of this game. How do you create the right naming, the right metadata, the right AEO to ensure that when someone doesn't know your app, it does actually still allow it to be found. Yeah, you can see it from the prompt there if you just look up a bit. Let's create a gig for a freelancer. So we've not mentioned ChatGig, but we have sort of referred slightly to the name. We were playing with this before, so you used it a couple of times. It might show it a bit more. I think that's a part here, but I think that's an interesting part as well to think about around discoverability.
I had it froze. I refreshed it, then it worked. So now you can see I submitted it. The card just changes. Really, it is like an app. Then we can have it link to the little marketplace that we set up. And here you can kind of just see all the gigs that this MCP has been posting to. And this is the last one, right? So logo redesign with warm package. You can go back, view the chat, or we can do some sort of apply.
So
And then
this is almost like someone could go on this and see available gigs. This is not, or this is each person would have this view.
no, this is everyone, right?
Okay.
So
Right.
here's an apply, and I think a logical, if you were to actually want to create this full marketplace, you can imagine you'd have an agent that is doing automated reach out to qualified freelancers, right? Maybe turn this into like an email campaign, see if they, you want to make sure they're qualified. And because we have kind of the gig creators email, we could match them, right? There's really a lot of intuitive ways. And I think something that would be very cool is if you go to here, and you'd almost immediately could have an LLM or an agent directly link you to like 3 qualified people, and maybe you select 1 or 2 that you like or think would do particularly well, and they would directly be connected to you, right? So
Mm.
uh, it's a much more easy and intuitive experience, and then you just keep working, right? Then you go on to the next design asset, right? Like it's a workflow thing, right? So you're almost like handing off little pieces of work that you get to 70-80%. You just quickly hire someone to get you across the finish line, and you keep doing what you're doing, right?
And should we run through another example?
Yeah, so I think something everyone can relate with is the legal side. If you're a small business, you're probably relying on chat to do like contracts, or let's say we do like a safe investment agreement between Ghost Team and Big Money Capital VC, and they're going to buy 1% for 1 million, create a safe, right? So the fair starting point, right? You could put in the requirements, this is the business logic, 1% for 1 million, but you're going to need a qualified professional, right? So here, I think you would say, okay, great, let's create a gig, or let's try without a gig. Let's see how it responds. Let's have a qualified lawyer look at this and ensure it's what like perfect. I have a budget of $4,000. I'm not sure it's going to pick it up. Let's try. No, it's gonna do a web search.
Yeah. Yeah, this is going to be part of the
Everyone's
game. It's honestly, I mean, obviously this is in developer mode, right? And so we'll go into it and I'll share my screen and highlight some of this, but there's going to be a huge amount of work to get your metadata right on the full build to ensure that you pick up. And actually, Vincent, maybe we can get into it, but when developing this, um, what work could you already do with the Apps SDK on a metadata perspective? And Did you do any work there to help with visibility yet?
Yeah, I'm just now trying to. So I really did have to say use the MCP to create a gig, and then it picked it up, right? So
Yeah.
I think this is also because it's a custom connector. And something I've noticed is if I use it multiple times in a row, especially in the same chat, it ChatGPT gets smart enough to know you like that MCP, right? I do think there's a bit of personalization and learning. And look, even here, it now because I think it's a new chat, it kind of reset, and now it's asking, is this app helpful? So I could say yes, and it helps ChatGPT learn which connectors and MCP servers
Hmm.
you find useful.
Yeah.
So maybe now we can try a little bit of a more loose prompt. Um, let's try again and have a qualified professional review the contract. My budget is 3,000, 4,000. Yeah, see, this was a looser prompt. So you can actually see it get, I guess, more assertive, right? In picking a tool based off of your history on which tools you have been using. So in terms of how chat chooses tools, you have these connectors, and they all have descriptions. So create a gig from a chat for a freelance marketplace. And then the way an MCP works is it has a few tools. In this case, we have two tools: create new gig and save gig. Create new gig is where this is the important one, right? This is where we need to then activate the connector to turn your chat history or chat context into that gig card. And there's this description, creates a freelancer gig posting from the conversation. Use when user wants to turn discussed work into a formal gig listing. Trigger phrases, create a gig, create gig for. So this is part of the description, right? You're actually telling
Hmm.
ChatGPT what are possible trigger phrases. So you could imagine you'd want to put a lot more here instead of just etc. Right? You'd really want to get into the psychology of users and learn what they are typing and what kind of intents they have, so that you activate an MCP or a cert like an experience, an app experience based off of those intents.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then maybe even just while we're talking about it, I could share screen quickly because I think this is an important thing to bring up. So, um, ChatGPT, if you go into their apps SDK documentation, they've got a lot of useful stuff in here, including we'll talk about ideas later, but how to research and come up with ideas, which gives you indications on what kind of use cases are going to make sense and do they sort of want to promote. But they have a piece here on optimizing metadata. This is effectively getting your app found. And like Vincent was just saying, you're gonna have almost it's so similar to the App Store, and we'll get to how we talk about this within the iPhone, where you have ASO optimizing all the keywords within your app, then understanding based on people that are going to start reading the sort of like equivalent of ASO that's taking place and allowing you to track it. How do you change different keywords? And then how does that make your app appear more? But they talk about things like golden prompt sets, right? These are all the different types of prompts that might help your tool come up. Then they have these different guidelines. And I think it'll be a very similar game to we've seen in the App Store, where you are having to learn what stuff helps your app get shown, how can you adjust keywords, how can you track that over time, and then see the different visibilities of your app. So interesting to discover this. At this stage, Vince, in the developer mode, did you see any other areas where they'd suggested things we could change within metadata to get visibility? I don't know if it's something it's more for like public facing apps, like their official approved apps in the ChatGPT App Store.
well, I think, there's obviously some partnerships. I think they're going to be very close to Canva. We heard it during the developer days. Um, Zillow, I believe. They had a few other examples, right? I think they had like 50 launch partners. They're obviously going to get some sort of exclusive priority. Um, so expect to see that come up a lot. And I'm sure they'll do some sort of smart geographic partitioning, right? So if you're connecting from an IP address in Europe, I don't think, that you're going to get Zillow when you're asking for houses. So I'd imagine they're really going to think about what makes sense for your context. Um, I could imagine perhaps if you're on an enterprise subscription or a team subscription, you're going to get less commercial apps, and maybe they'll prioritize, the internal apps, right? You can have connectors that are just for your company, and I could imagine maybe admins will be able to influence that, right? Like right now, there's no real way to put weights that I've seen from an admin perspective. We have a team subscription, not an enterprise subscription, so that's all I've been able to see. But you can connect and create an MCP connector for a team. And then, like as you said, Elliot, I think it's going to become the next app store essentially, where you're going to compete for not only getting a user to manually connect a connector, right? So that's one option. But then once they're in the list of active connectors, imagine you have a Fiverr and an Upwork uh, connector, right? And you have a gig you want to post. Which one is it going to trigger, or is it going to trigger both? That could be interesting, right? You kind of have a split journey where like it just activates both. Why
Mhm.
not?
Yeah, 100%. And it's going to be so interesting to see how this evolves because you can almost imagine two different journeys as well, where, with iPhone, you don't just have you doing actions and then you being triggered to download an app. You choose every app that's on your phone. And right
Yeah.
now, within ChatGPT, you are having to choose to connect certain applications, and that's the only way that data is shown. But I think, and I hope, to be honest, we do see the ability for chat to understand that context and get that distribution. You'd expect them to go that way, but I hope that they do enable that, just because the seamlessness of that experience. Obviously, you will have to still approve, right? In nothing we've seen, whether it's Claude, Chat, anything like this, have they just allowed for even actions that these MCPs are doing, you're approving if you choose to, or you can let it just run. So you always have to accept, but I think this ability to just have stuff appear is good. And I think so far, when you read between the lines with the documentation, they're suggesting that that's what's going to happen. Before we get, I think we can go down more of that trend, and I really want to as well. Before we do, I'd love to talk about, you've been developing now with the Apps SDK for about a week. I think it's been about a week since the launch. How have you found it? What has been good? I know we've been also struggling with some stuff, right? Some things have not been so smooth. So how have you found the SDK so far?
Yeah, so the first day it just didn't work, and that's fine. After a day it worked, and I think we've seen this as well with, for instance, the what's the workflow editor that they launched,
The agent kit.
Agent Kit,
Hmm.
where they released it, and the first day it just didn't work. There were just errors.
Playing heavily with Agent Kit, and yeah, yeah.
So I do think OpenAI is releasing very fast, and it is, the code is still hot. I found they share a the documentation is good though. I think they have a good documentation website, and let me quickly just share. They have this OpenAI Apps SDK example GitHub, which anyone who's looking to start playing around with apps on OpenAI, start with this GitHub, clone it. Very, very easy to do. It's a couple commands. And then they have four, I think even five really good examples. One is a pizza ordering and creating app, and it shows kind of like a map with pizzerias near you. One is a to-do app, which allows you to you saw how in that gig card I was able to kind of update text right in the card. I really just copied the code patterns from this quite comprehensive apps SDK. The getting it to work in OpenAI, it's not that difficult once you understand how to do it. You can see here it says developer mode. So if you want to work with custom connectors, you need to be in developer mode. And you need to have a, I think, plus or pro subscription, and you just go to personalization, you go to apps and connectors, and under here there's advanced settings. So you just toggle this on. So now you see it's off, now it's on. From there, you have the apps and connectors, and here you just click create. You give your connector a name, a clear description. Again, we talked about how important that is. And then the MCP URL. And it in the GitHub here, they share how you can kind of set this up really quickly from a local environment. You have to use ngrok. I'm not sure I'm saying that right. It's essentially a way to get the code on your computer on a server so that it can connect here. It has to be on a server, and you just do no authentication, and that's it. You have it. You have it live. So it's actually pretty straightforward. So I do recommend, if you are interested in checking out the Apps SDK, you just start with that GitHub. You start playing around. I think we have like 10 more ideas we're interested to build, and once you do it once, it's pretty intuitive and straightforward. So yeah, it's just an MCP that serves UI, and it's pretty rich, right? So it's React code. It's kind of advanced front end code. You could see it could go full screen. You could embed videos. You could essentially do anything you do on a normal app.
Yeah. And I think what we could talk about now is two things. One is, what are the other examples that we're thinking about? Because I think it's quite interesting to just show the breadth here. And then I think that can feed into just explaining a bit more about this opportunity in general, because there's a good chance this is the basically biggest distribution play we've seen since the opening of the App Store. And it is ginormous and will potentially be one of the biggest paradigm shifts we see in the technology landscape, depending on how it pans out. And so I want to just pan out some sort of like interesting data just from like previous cycles we've seen, and therefore, how this could evolve, and therefore why it's interesting to brands. I think in terms of like use cases and stuff, we're thinking about the one reaction that I had just from this was, you could see when they open their partners. Maybe I can even just bring up the a partner image just to show how many different companies they had there. Now, like Vince mentioned, they did have specific companies they chose first. And the reason for that is because I believe they want to show trust, right? It was two things. They want to show trust, but then what they also want to show, and this is an example here, they want to show the breadth of different use cases, right? They've got all sorts here. You're booking a hotel, booking.com comes up. You're developing an asset, Canva comes up. You wanted to learn a course, you could do that within Coursera. You can really see how varied these use cases are. And so you will just start to see um, all sorts of brands. Really, every brand is going to need to have a presence here, and we'll talk about that just in terms of even being able to stay competitive.
What do
Using
you think the Spotify Apps SDK would be?
that one, I think I've heard the use case, or at least the one they demoed, and it's things like creating playlists. So you might ask, I'm having people over at the weekend. I want a jazz vibe. Create me a playlist on jazz, and then it would connect into your Spotify and do that playlist. Interestingly, and I don't know, you got to think about how to do this if you're an app. Spotify has a free tier. So there's always going to be this like login issue, like access and then login. So that needs to be thought about. But yeah, I think that was the Spotify one. It feels a bit less intuitive. I don't know how many. This is a good example of like, what are the apps use cases that are going to be most prominent, right? How many
Yeah.
times I've never really done any music requests at all, to be honest, in chat. Um,
They have two like dinner or food booking places, which is quite interesting. They have Uber, which
uh,
I don't, yeah, I mean, why not, right? Call me an Uber, right? And
yeah,
then
yeah. But maybe
widget.
maybe it does show you also direction for this, and I think a play that they're having, right, which is like, it's trying to become the everything app.
Yeah, the
You
WeChat
you
of
you you do
life.
everything within this window. And I think the other thing to mention here is, um, you know, the apps that you're seeing now, we just developed a very simple one. I no doubt Fiverr are going to create a version. Um, the apps use cases that you've seen here, these are the worst these apps are ever going to get. And I've been thinking about this as soon as we kind of were aware, okay, apps could exist within LLMs. Um, the question started to become, and people were talking about this a couple of months ago, what happens to the browser? Why, if you can do stuff in chat, would you need to go to one? And my first thought was always just experience. You know, if you have these long blocks of text, it does not help you to gain the rich UI that you need to do so much of the things that we do on the internet today. But with these apps, that really gets removed away. You know, you can, depending on how they develop it, create really any experience or a huge number of those experiences. I still believe the browser is going to be needed. There's going to be a huge amount of custom work, and you're never going to have that much flexibility. It's like your phone. But when your phone moved, it was like going from mobile, put really simply, like mobile when it was just cellular, to smartphones and the use cases that that then enabled. You then went to a computer less, right? So I think we're seeing that trend, and it's going to be interesting. We've been talking about, yeah, a couple of different areas. I think e-commerce is going to be particularly interesting. I actually
By
think
the
it was,
way, it's not on this list, right? I think they demoed something with Etsy. We know Shopify is kind of all in, and they actually were the first to announce that they're investing heavily in apps in LLMs with the MCP UI. No Amazon,
no,
which you'd think are the intuitive, obvious use cases.
and it is interesting they did that actually, because you have they did do a separate announcement, I think, just before this around commerce. So you did have exclusive partnerships with Etsy and Shopify to develop specific e-commerce applications within ChatGPT. So you can check out now in ChatGPT for those use cases, and they are live. They're in the US. So the e-commerce side is particularly interesting. The other area that I think is interesting as well is mobile apps. So there's a huge number of mobile apps that obviously exist on mobile, but you can imagine the same thing happening within ChatGPT. So if you take some simple use cases, you know, fitness planners, creating recipes, stuff like this. You know, previously you might have asked Chat, you know, create me, these are my requirements, create me a fitness plan, and I want to focus on these areas. It's just going to be text. Now, with the right application, that could be a full, you could browse through different workout exercises, you can see all the visuals, etc. So I think um, that's particularly interesting. And then final point I'd mention would be this is a lot of examples about use cases that already exist that are then now accessible in a chat window. What I'm quite interested in is what new experiences based on the way that we interact with these LLMs create an opportunity for new applications that we don't currently have or we aren't currently aware of. And that to me is an exciting opportunity because it's a world of things that are new. And like that's the big reason why we're also developing in this space is because we want to be fully embedded to be on the forefront of kind of like surface area for covering these use cases. And so yeah, I think we won't just see big players like this and apps we know there. We're going to see huge amounts of new applications that get developed as well.
Yeah, you found this really good visual. I think a friend of yours made it with
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you should bring that up
Yeah. Oh, where is that?
where it kind of starts to you know at this point it's a bit of a guess, right? But what are kind of the design principles you can think about where you'd want to bring this into a chat interface versus keep it separate?
Yeah, so we had some good use cases here and poor use cases. So,
So who made this?
friend and colleague Spencer, we built a mobile app together in the past, and this is yeah, just highlighting sort of if it answers yes, then therefore it would be used more. So to run through some of these, does the task fit naturally into a conversation? So it's automatically going to put it in when it's happening. Is it time bound or action orientated? So something needs to happen. It needs to pull the app up and new use case up. Is the information valuable at the moment? That's interesting. Users can act on it right away or get concise preview before. Can it be summarized visually and simply? This is, I think, actually really important because right now the apps are simple. They are not complex. You saw from, ChatGig, there's just going to be a simple card with the collections. Nothing is super complex. You can do some quite custom UI stuff. It's worth saying, you know, we saw Zillow having whole maps already in there. So you can do some good stuff, but I agree, like relatively simply. And yeah, does it extend to ChatGPT?
Basically, poor use case. Use the space for ads and upsells. So I mean, I don't know. Like, we put up with a lot of ads and upsells in a lot of our apps, right? So, I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, I also think this is a big debate that's happening at the moment, actually, because there is Sora 2 got released. Everyone expects that to be the place that they then choose to do a lot of advertisement because that's where advertisement exists a lot in social media, Instagram, for example. Within chat, there's all this conversation around ads coming and that happening probably on the free tier. And then if you're a subscriber, you're not going to be getting those ads. But it's interesting, right? And then you need to trust OpenAI that when they do an ad, I believe, I don't know, people always talk about how, ads are suddenly going to be, which they are, they're going to be very intelligent. They're going to know what you want. But everyone talks about them as if they're going to just exist directly in the feed and almost the ad is going to manipulate the data that's shown. And I'm not sure they'll do that. I hope they don't. I can imagine an app experience where an ad experience, you still get the same result, but if you've got that result, it then has like, a pop-up or a separate screen that shows you an ad that's related to it, but it doesn't change the answer. I think keeping the truth consistent is super important. If they go down the route of changing the truth or the best possible answer to give you an ad, and that's in your window. Sure, it's a good experience from an ad perspective, it's going to convert higher, but man, that sucks. It's a crazy thought.
I think we are going to see is we're going to see monetized MCPs, right? So let's say you're delivering value, like let's say you're a, I don't know, an educator and you have a lot of good courses, for instance, on how to design good apps SDKs, right? And you're querying, and in fact, it's not a bad use case. Like I have a use case, is this a good apps SDK use case? And then this MCP could say like, well, we have a framework, right? But like it's not for free. Or kind of like maybe like a freemium MCP. If you want to like use the full framework with the videos, and we look at your use case and then we digest it with our context and our prompts, it'll either cost you $5 or look at this 2-minute ad. Like we're used to those experiences,
Yeah,
and the MCP could serve that ad, right? It's just UI. You can give the user the choice,
yeah.
and I don't think like I mean that's why OpenAI is probably being quite careful on which connectors and apps they want in the beginning to not set the foundation for, like bad experiences like that. But it's inevitable, I think.
Totally inevitable, and their business model needs it, frankly. They've got a lot of subscription revenue for sure, but if they're going to scale properly, like ad revenue, for example, is the biggest thing within Google, right? I think the model is humongous, and actually
Yeah,
the
but like
free.
I think the interesting insight is if you like I have this ChatGig MCP and Elliot, you like it and use it. I from the ChatGig infrastructure could show you an ad on OpenAI without OpenAI being
Mm,
even involved. Does that
yeah,
make sense? Because I
yeah,
just show you UI from my server and
yeah,
I could have you look at an ad before you post a gig, right?
yeah.
So
It's true.
it could
Yeah,
be
yeah,
policy that OpenAI says you cannot do that, but
yeah.
there's nothing that technically wouldn't stop me from a connector owner, MCP owner of doing that.
Yeah. It's a really good point. And I keep thinking every time I think of these use cases, I always think back to the App Store. Every single time for those that are less familiar with the developing app cycles, every time you make an update to your app, Apple checks it. It then gets approved and it gets released. They have complete control. You obviously, as the moat scales, they want more people developing apps. That's the point, and I'll talk through that in a second. But um, I think they will have some control, and maybe at the start they're more like less lenient, perhaps on these kind of use cases. But then I think they'll enable them, right? It's up to you as a company to decide. If you do a load of ads, then you might have a bad experience. People might not come back. So it just is more you leave it up to the market to decide what they want to do, and therefore determines the success or in terms of revenue or people stop using whatever it ends up being. Cool. Final thing I wanted to talk about is just like why this space is interesting and the shift that we're beginning to see from all the channel we're beginning to see open from a distribution perspective, and really like sort of like how rare this is. Now, I have I'm just gonna share my screen and just walk through a visual, which I've obviously used Claude, actually, funnily enough, to create. I'm much more of a fan, to be honest. So these, just to talk about this app opportunity. So it's very rare for these distribution opportunities to arise. A comparable to just look back in history is Facebook opens up its platform and allows you to build applications on top of it, and then allows you to do ads. That is a huge opportunity. You can distribute to one of the biggest networks ever to exist. Google is the same thing. It took a bit longer, but there was a opening up where Google became prominent. It then opened up for people to build on top of it. There was a surge where you could get amazing distribution for SEO and ads, and then that is tailored over time where people say SEO is completely crowded. There's no opportunity there anymore. Exactly the same with the App Store. iPhone opened up, Apple gave an opportunity for people to develop. People rushed to the App Store, created every app in existence. It got saturated. AI has changed that. It's developed new mobile applications, and the App Store has become a bit more interesting. But then what happened is it opened up, developers came, they closed the doors and became more controlled, and then started to take 30% cuts, right? So I think that the same thing is happening right now within OpenAI and within ChatGPT and within LLMs. It's the biggest distribution open up an opportunity we've seen since the App Store and the iPhone. And what tends to happen is you find the right market conditions. Now, what that means is you start to see an opportunity open up, like we saw search happening within the internet and Google, Bing, these companies go after it. This is happening within LLMs. There are a landscape of OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, etc., in fierce competition to get that audience. What you then have is you have a sort of moat identified. So there are ways that these companies then figure out, okay, this is how we're then going to succeed. And there's some stuff going on around the fact that you have the most context, you have good memory, maybe you become a bit more specific like Claude is doing, but there is a clear view that within their ecosystem, we know how many like daily active users, monthly active users OpenAI has. They've got nearly 800 million. They're winning this race, and they've got a clear moat to do that, particularly if they start to then think about how they can open up these platforms. It becomes a sort of fierce race to how can you defend the lead that you have. And then what happens, which is the stage we're just going into now, is they then, to accelerate that growth and win, open up the platform, i.e., you cannot do it on your own. So what you want to try and do is make sure that for anything that gets developed in these LLMs, you are the platform where all the use cases get developed. And you, like you said, you can't do it yourself. So they open it up to third-party developers. This is the same thing when you saw people building apps within the iPhone, not just iPhone apps, right? Millions of apps get created. Same with Facebook when Facebook opened up its apps and had everything developed there. So this is where we are right now. We are starting to see this happen, and we are at the forefront of it. We're 1 week in. And what's interesting is that you have to figure out how long you want to spend in this game, because you are going into a third party ecosystem. And what happens is it tends to, in previous cycles, be really open, and they sort of allow developers to grow and to build and develop use cases. And then what they do is they eventually make it more closed. So it will move from sort of like lots of these developers generating lots of revenue, and there being sort of I suppose, a wide variety of applications you can develop, to then potentially it being more closed. They will start to put down ads. They might reduce some revenue streams. They might take over experiences. Let's say you have an app that does incredibly well. OpenAI just says, oh, we're shutting you off, and we're going to actually develop that real estate instead. Now, what that does is that makes it sort of a game that you have to play, but one that you need to always have right from the start an understanding of your exit plan. And what's interesting in this is that you might say, well, why can't we just therefore not play that game, right? It's a It's a platform play. You've got to be very careful. There's potentially some disadvantages where later down the line your business model gets disrupted. It's all true. That's why you can never be a company that is fully dependent on this platform. You need to develop an ecosystem outside of it and have an exit plan. But what happens with these shifts is that if you don't play the game, your competitors do. So everyone then, and not on top of that, it also becomes an expectation from the users. So if you are a company that has, let's take Fiverr, for example. If we develop a use case where we're seeing that people are now doing gigs within ChatGPT, and as Fiverr, you do not have an app within ChatGPT to enable people to easily get that traffic, Upwork does, and they will be the moat now. So they have the distribution. So you're sort of forced to compete, and you need to do that as quickly as possible. But I think it's a call out to just say, like, these platform opportunities do close, and you've got to really think about your exit plan and how to get around that. So I wanted to share it because I think it's an interesting time we're in. I think it's incredibly exciting, and they don't open often, and so it's cool to play at the edges of what this shapes out to be. And actually it becomes a necessary factor to compete. You are going to have to figure out for your business, for incumbents, you have it in a way, as long as you act, it's easier. You can do more spread bets. You can sort of like develop a use case and act a bit slower if necessary. Ideally, it's quicker. But for startups, I think it's worth saying, like, you have to just decide. You have to either be all in. You don't have the resources, right, to be spread. So you need to be very focused in terms of the use cases you go for and doubling down. But yeah, exciting times ahead, and very interested to see how it develops on the OpenAI ecosystem.
We want to hear feedback on the the chat MCP gig idea, and we'll have a landing page if you're interested. Chatgig.chat, a bit of a play on ChatKit. And I think in extension to what Elliot said, we at Ghost Team were very interested to build unique, interesting use cases that will fit like a hand in glove in an LLM. So if you're someone who has an idea and thinks, we should spin up a little demo, talk to us. We'd be really interested to have a chat about that.